Welcome to this journey through one of the most disturbing cases recorded in the history of Georgia. Before we begin, I invite you to leave in the comments where you are watching from and the exact time at which you are listening to this narration. We are interested to know to which places and at what times of day or night these documented accounts reach. In the autumn of 1853, in Chatham County, Georgia, approximately 12 miles west of Savannah, a small wooden cross was discovered on the edge of the Carswell plantation. This discovery would not have been particularly unusual, except for the inscription crudely carved into its base. "They are in the ground, but their souls feed the pigs." The cross was found by a traveling merchant who reported it to the local sheriff. Within 24 hours, 3 children from the Carswell family had been reported missing. What followed was one of the most disturbing investigations in antebellum Georgia, a case that remained largely undocumented until historian Miriam Holcomb uncovered county records in 1962. The Carswell plantation was known for its prosperous rice and cotton harvests. The main house stood on a slight elevation, overlooking rows of slave quarters and agricultural fields that stretched toward the swamplands. The family was headed by Thaddeus Carswell, a third-generation plantation owner whose grandfather had established the estate in 1790. According to county records, Carswell owned approximately 47 enslaved persons. The family consisted of his wife, Margaret, and their 3 children, Elizabeth, aged 12, Thomas, aged 9, and Sarah, aged 6. Eliza Brown was one of the house servants, approximately 36 years old according to sale records. She had been purchased by Thaddeus Carswell 7 years prior from a neighboring plantation after the death of her previous owner. Eliza was assigned to care for the Carswell children and assist with kitchen duties. According to accounts from other house servants recorded years later, Eliza was known for her exceptional cooking skills and her seemingly boundless patience with the children. Margaret Carswell had noted in her household journal that Eliza was remarkably competent and quiet in her duties. What was not recorded in these household accounts was the underlying tension that permeated the Carswell household. Thaddeus Carswell had a reputation among plantation owners in Chatham County for his strict disciplinary methods. Several county records indicate complaints filed by neighboring plantation owners about Carswell's treatment of enslaved workers who had fled to their properties. These complaints were consistently dismissed by local authorities. On October 14, 1853, Margaret Carswell wrote in her journal, "The children have been particularly difficult today. Eliza seems withdrawn, less communicative than usual. Thomas broke his father's reading glasses and has been confined to his room. Elizabeth continues to complain of stomach pains, though Dr. Whitfield can find no cause. The air feels heavy, as though a storm approaches." The following day, October 15th, would be the last documented day that anyone saw the 3 Carswell children alive. According to testimonies compiled months later, the day began like any other on the plantation. The enslaved field workers departed for the fields before dawn. Margaret Carswell spent the morning visiting a neighboring plantation to discuss arrangements for the upcoming harvest festival. Thaddeus Carswell rode into Savannah on business. Not expected to return until the following day, the children remained at home under Eliza's supervision. Elizabeth had been excused from her studies due to continuing complaints of stomach discomfort. Thomas was still being punished for the incident with his father's glasses. Sarah, the youngest, spent the morning playing in the nursery under Eliza's watchful eye. Another house servant, Samuel Johnson, would later recall that Eliza had been unusually active in the kitchen that day, preparing a special meal for the children. She said it was medicinal, Johnson reported to investigators, something to settle Miss Elizabeth's stomach troubles. She wouldn't let anyone else near the cooking pot. By mid-afternoon, all 3 children had eaten the special meal prepared by Eliza. By evening, All three had fallen ill with similar symptoms: drowsiness, confusion, and eventually a deep sleep from which they could not be roused. When Margaret Carswell returned at dusk, she found Elizabeth and Thomas in their beds, unresponsive but breathing. Sarah was nowhere to be found. What happened in the hours that followed has been pieced together from fragmentary accounts. Margaret Carswell immediately sent for Dr. Whitfield, who arrived shortly before midnight. By this time, Thomas had stopped breathing. Elizabeth remained in a comatose state. A search party was organized to look for Sarah, but darkness hampered their efforts. More disturbing was the simultaneous disappearance of Eliza Brown. She was not in her quarters, nor was she found anywhere on the plantation grounds. A later search of her sparse living space revealed only a small, handmade doll fashioned from corn husks, similar to those made by children on the plantation. Dawn revealed footprints leading from the main house toward the pig pen at the far edge of the property. According to Sheriff Williams' report, dated October 16th, the pig pen showed signs of recent disturbance. The ground had been freshly turned in several places. The animals appeared agitated and unusually aggressive. When Thaddeus Carswell returned from Savannah later that day, he ordered the pig pen to be emptied and the ground excavated. What they discovered beneath the mud and soil has been described in county records with clinical detachment. Partial remains of what appeared to be human origin, primarily small bones and fragments. These remains were never officially identified, but the search for Sarah Carswell was officially ended. Elizabeth Carswell never regained consciousness. She died 3 days later. Dr. Whitfield's report cited unknown toxicity leading to organ failure as the cause of death. No autopsy was performed on Thomas, whose body was quickly buried in the family cemetery along with his sister. The ensuing manhunt for Eliza Brown extended throughout Chatham County and into neighboring counties. Wanted notices described her as a murderous Negro woman of average height and build, approximately 36 years of age, with a burn scar on her right hand. A reward of $500 was offered for her capture, dead or alive. For weeks, the Carswell plantation and surrounding properties were searched extensively. Several enslaved persons were interrogated, often brutally, for information about Eliza's whereabouts or any knowledge of her plans. According to county records, at least 2 died during these interrogations. None provided any useful information. Eliza Brown was never found. The case might have faded into obscurity, one more dark chapter in the history of the South, were it not for a discovery made almost 3 decades later. In 1882, during construction of a new county courthouse in Savannah, workers uncovered a sealed metal box within the cornerstone of the old building. Inside was a handwritten journal, its pages yellowed but legible. The journal was signed simply E.B. and dated 1853. County officials initially dismissed the journal as a hoax or a work of fiction. It was filed away and forgotten until historian Miriam Holcomb discovered it while researching court records for an unrelated project in 1962. What she found was a document of such disturbing content that she debated whether to include it in her research. The journal, comprising approximately 30 pages, detailed the experiences of a woman who had been enslaved on multiple plantations throughout Georgia. The writer described systematic abuses, daily humiliations, and the psychological toll of captivity. The most disturbing entries concerned her time at a plantation that, while never named explicitly, matched the description of the Carswell estate. "The master beats his own children," one entry read. "Not as he beats us, but with words that cut deeper than any whip. The youngest girl cries at night. I hold her until she sleeps. The boy tries to be like his father, practicing cruelty as though it were a lesson to be learned. The oldest girl watches everything, says nothing. Her eyes grow colder each day." Another entry, dated approximately 2 weeks before the disappearance of the Carswell children, contained this passage. "I found Sarah with welts on her arms today. When I asked who had hurt her, she said it was Thomas, practicing what their father had shown him. When I spoke to Thomas, he said only that Sarah needed to learn her place. He is 9 years old." The final entries become increasingly disjointed. References to a cleansing and freedom through transformation appear repeatedly. The last entry, dated October 14th, reads simply, "Tomorrow they will be free. We all will." Holcomb's research into county medical records revealed another disturbing detail. Dr. Whitfield had treated Elizabeth Carswell several times in the months preceding her death for feminine complaints inappropriate to her age. No further details were provided, but Holcomb noted that Elizabeth had turned 12 just 2 months before her death. In the years following the tragedy, the Carswell plantation fell into decline. Thaddeus and Margaret divorced in 1857, an unusual and scandalous occurrence for that time and place. Margaret returned to her family in Charleston, where she died in 1862. Thaddeus Carswell remarried in 1858 to a much younger woman who bore him 4 more children. None survived past infancy. During the Civil War, the Carswell plantation was abandoned as Union forces approached. Thaddeus Carswell reportedly fled to Texas, where records of his life become scarce. A man matching his description died in a Houston boarding house in 1874, apparently from alcohol poisoning. The former Carswell plantation land was divided and sold in parcels after the war. The main house burned under mysterious circumstances in 1879. Local folklore claimed the property was cursed, that the land itself had been poisoned by what had occurred there. In 1958, during construction of a highway that would cut through a portion of the former plantation grounds, workers uncovered a small metal container approximately 3 feet below the surface. Inside was a corn husk doll and a folded piece of paper. The paper contained a list of names, beginning with Elizabeth, Thomas, and Sarah Carswell, followed by the names of 47 enslaved persons owned by Thaddeus Carswell at the time of the children's deaths. At the bottom of the list was a final name, Eliza Brown. Next to it was written in the same hand, "Finally free." This discovery reignited interest in the case, leading Holcomb to her research project several years later. Her findings were published in a limited academic journal in 1964, but received little public attention. The journal itself, along with other documentation related to the case, was archived at Savannah State University, where it remained largely forgotten. In 1968, a graduate student researching antebellum agricultural practices requested access to the Carswell plantation records. According to university archives, the student checked out several documents, including the EB Journal. 3 days later, the student disappeared from campus. The journal and other borrowed materials were never returned. University records identified the student as Eleanor Blackwell. No record of an Eleanor Blackwell having been enrolled at the university has ever been found. Local folklore in Chatham County occasionally references the Carswell case, though details have been distorted over generations. Some versions claim that Eliza poisoned the entire Carswell family. Others suggest that the children were not killed, but hidden away, raised secretly by Eliza until they could escape north. Still others insist that the Pigpen revelation was fabricated to cover up an even more terrible truth. What remains consistent in these varied tellings is the description of Eliza Brown, a woman pushed beyond human endurance who responded with calculated retribution. Not a monster, but someone who had been systematically dehumanized until she reflected the monstrosity around her. The highway that now cuts through the former Carswell plantation is a busy thoroughfare, traveled by thousands each day. Few know the history of the land they pass over. Fewer still know about the small, unmarked grave on what was once the edge of the property, where each year on October 15th, someone places a corn husk doll. In 2004, during expansion of the highway, construction was temporarily halted when workers discovered bone fragments in the soil. Forensic analysis determined them to be pig bones, approximately 150 years old. The construction continued. The former pigpen area now lies beneath the eastbound lanes of the highway. Late at night, some drivers report a strange phenomenon, their car radios suddenly switching to static as they pass over a specific stretch of road. Through the static, some claim to hear what sounds like children's voices, what really happened on the Carswell plantation in October 1853. The fragmentary evidence allows for multiple interpretations. Was Eliza Brown a murderer, driven to unthinkable acts by the brutality of her circumstances? Was she a protector who saw death as the only escape she could offer children doomed to perpetuate or endure a cycle of violence? Or was she something else entirely, neither victim nor villain, but a woman who decided that freedom required the most terrible sacrifice? County records show that in the months following the children's deaths, 6 other enslaved persons escaped from neighboring plantations. None were recaptured. Some historians suggest that these escapes were inspired by Eliza's actions, that her defiance created a ripple effect throughout the region. What became of Eliza Brown herself remains unknown. Some speculate she made her way north via the Underground Railroad. Others believe she remained in Georgia, perhaps adopting a new identity. The truth, like so much of this case, lies buried beneath layers of time and intentional obscurity. The corn husk doll, found in 1958, was placed in the Savannah Historical Society's collection. In 1971, a fire damaged portions of the collection. The doll was among the items reported destroyed, yet every October 15th, a similar doll appears on the unmarked grave at the edge of the former plantation. No one has ever witnessed who places it there. As with many historical cases involving enslaved persons, the full truth of the Carswell plantation tragedy may never be known. Records were intentionally destroyed, testimonies went unrecorded, and those who might have spoken the truth were silenced by force or fear. What remains is a shadow narrative, glimpsed through fragments and whispers, a terrible act born of terrible circumstances, children who were both victims and perpetrators, a woman who decided that freedom, by any means, was worth any price. The land remembers, even when history books do not, and sometimes, late at night on that stretch of highway, radios catch more than static. They catch echoes of voices that ask us not to judge, but simply to remember. Remember that monsters are made, not born. Remember that beneath the sanitized narratives of history lie truths too painful to confront. Remember Eliza Brown, who fed her master's children to the pigs, and in doing so perhaps fed something else entirely, a hunger for justice that could not be satisfied by half measures. In the end, this is not a ghost story. There are no supernatural elements to this tale, no cursed ground or vengeful spirits. There is only human cruelty and human resistance playing out against the backdrop of one of America's greatest moral failures. The true horror lies not in what Eliza Brown may have done, but in the system that created the conditions for such an act to be conceivable. The true monsters were not the pigs who consumed human flesh, but the humans who consumed other humans' lives, dignity, and humanity. And perhaps the most disturbing question of all, in Eliza's position, what would any of us have done? The wooden cross that started this investigation was never found again after being logged as evidence. Sheriff records indicate it was stored in the county courthouse, the same building where, years later, the EB Journal would be discovered in the cornerstone. Some questions have no satisfying answers. Some stories have no resolution, only echoes that continue to reverberate through time. This is one such story. If you find yourself driving that stretch of highway outside Savannah, pay attention to your radio. Listen for the static. Listen for the voices beneath. They are still there in the ground, and something still feeds. In 1965, Professor James Harrington of Emory University conducted interviews with elderly residents of Chatham County as part of an oral history project. Among those interviewed was Ruth Coleman, 97 years old at the time, whose grandmother had been enslaved on a plantation near the Carswell property. The transcript of this interview, filed away and largely forgotten until 2001, contains a remarkable account. According to Coleman, her grandmother spoke of a woman named Eliza who had worked in the big house on a neighboring plantation. Grandmother said this Eliza had lost children of her own, Coleman recalled. 3 babies, all taken and sold away before they could walk. Sold to different places so far away she knew she'd never find them again. Coleman's grandmother had described how Eliza would sometimes be seen talking to herself in the kitchen garden as though her children were still with her. But she wasn't crazy, Coleman emphasized in the interview. Grandmother said she was the sanest person on that whole plantation. She just had a plan nobody knew about. The Coleman interview provides the only known reference to Eliza Brown having had children of her own, a detail absent from the Carswell plantation records. If true, it adds another layer to the tragedy, suggesting a woman who had already experienced the most profound loss a parent can endure. Further research by historian Rebecca Torres in 1997 uncovered sales records from the estate of Eliza's previous owner, Jacob Winters. These records, dated 1846, document the sale of 3 Negro children, ages 4 years, 2 years, and 8 months, all in good health. While the children are identified only by age, not by their mother, the timing corresponds with Eliza's presence on the Winters plantation. Torres also discovered medical records from Dr. Whitfield that reference treating Eliza for female melancholia shortly after her arrival at the Carswell plantation. The treatment prescribed was bloodletting and forced labor, common remedies of the era, for what would now be recognized as profound grief and trauma. Perhaps most disturbing was Torres's discovery of Thaddeus Carswell's personal correspondence with neighboring plantation owners. In a letter dated April 1852, Carswell wrote, "The house servant Eliza continues to form inappropriate attachments to my children, particularly the youngest. I have instructed Margaret to monitor her closely and correct any overfamiliarity. We cannot have these people forgetting their place." A responding letter from William Barrett, owner of an adjacent property, advised, "It is a common problem with those who serve in the house. They begin to imagine themselves part of the family. I find a swift return to fieldwork for a season reminds them of their true position. No record exists of Eliza being sent to the fields, suggesting that despite his concerns, Carswell continued to value her services in the house. This contradiction, the simultaneous exploitation of her domestic skills and suppression of her human connections, epitomizes the perverse logic of the slave system. In 2008, archaeologist Martin Delaney conducted ground-penetrating radar surveys of the area surrounding the former Carswell plantation as part of a broader study of antebellum settlements. The survey revealed an anomaly approximately 1 mile from the main house site, in what would have been dense woodland in the 1850s. Excavation of this anomaly uncovered the foundation of a small structure, approximately 8 feet by 10 feet. Artifacts recovered from the site included fragments of handmade ceramic vessels, a rusted kitchen knife, and a collection of small bones initially identified as animal remains. Further analysis determined that the bones were a mixture of pig and chicken bones, with unusual cut marks suggesting they had been fashioned into crude tools or implements. More significantly, the excavation uncovered a small hollow beneath the dirt floor, containing a sealed glass jar. Inside the jar was a folded piece of fabric, Preserved by the airtight seal, the fabric appeared to be a child's nightgown, sized for a young girl. Stitched into the hem in barely visible thread were 3 sets of initials, EB, JB, and MB. Delaney's report suggests that the structure may have been a temporary shelter used by Eliza Brown after fleeing the Carswell plantation. The nightgown, with initials matching her own name and potentially those of her souled children, represents a tangible connection to her past life and lost family. The discovery offers a glimpse of Eliza as more than just a perpetrator of violence, as a mother who carried the memory of her children even as she fled for her life. It complicates the narrative, challenging us to see her actions within the full context of her lived experience. In 2012, digital restoration of Margaret Carswell's household journal revealed entries previously too faded to read. Among these was a disturbing account dated July 1853, just 3 months before the children's deaths. Discovered Thomas tormenting one of the kitchen cats today. The poor creature was already dead when I found them. When questioned, he said he was only practicing what father had shown him in the quarters last week. Must speak to Thaddeus about conducting such business away from the house. The boy is too young to witness such things. Another entry from September. Elizabeth has been spending too much time with her father in his study. She returns with strange notions about natural hierarchies and divine order. At 12, she should be focused on her music and needlework, not political philosophy. Thaddeus says I coddle her, that she must understand her place in society as a future mistress. I fear she is learning the wrong lessons, and most disturbingly, an entry from just 2 weeks before the tragedy. Found Sarah crying in the kitchen. Eliza was comforting her. When asked what troubled her, she would not say, only clung tighter to Eliza. Later, Elizabeth told me that Thomas had taken Sarah to the whipping post and made her watch as father disciplined 2 field hands for failing to meet their quota. Sarah has had nightmares since. Eliza prepares her special tea to help her sleep. Must tell Thaddeus that the children should be kept away from such scenes. These entries suggest a household where violence was normalized, where children were being systematically indoctrinated into the brutal hierarchy of plantation life. They also indicate that Eliza had positioned herself as a source of comfort and protection for at least the youngest child, establishing a complex relationship that makes her subsequent actions all the more disturbing. In 2015, literary scholar Josephine Wright analyzed the EB Journal, found in the Courthouse Cornerstone, focusing not on its content but on its linguistic patterns. Her analysis revealed that the writer had likely received some education, unusual for an enslaved person of that era. The consistent spelling and grammatical structures suggested someone who had regular access to written materials and possibly some formal instruction. Wright compared the journal to other known writings by enslaved and formerly enslaved individuals from the same period and region. Her conclusion was that the EB Journal showed similarities to writings associated with educated house servants who had clandestine access to their owners' libraries. This finding aligns with accounts of Eliza's position in the Carswell household. As a caretaker for the children, she would likely have been present during their lessons, perhaps absorbing education that was never intended for her. This access to knowledge, combined with her intimate awareness of the family's dynamics, would have given her insights and capabilities beyond those of many of her enslaved contemporaries. Knowledge, in this context, became both a tool and a burden, allowing Eliza to understand more fully the system that oppressed her while offering no legitimate means of escape from it. During renovation of the Savannah Historical Society building in 2018, workers discovered a hidden compartment in an antique desk that had once belonged to Sheriff Williams, the original investigator of the Carswell case. Inside was a sealed envelope containing a single sheet of paper. The document appeared to be a transcription of an interview with someone identified only as Witness J, dated November 1853, approximately 1 month after the Carswell children disappeared. The transcription reads in part, "Witness claims to have encountered a Negro woman matching Eliza Brown's description approximately 14 miles south of the Carswell plantation, traveling alone at night. Witness reports the woman appeared calm, not frightened, and walked with purpose rather than the furtive manner typical of runaways. When questioned about her destination, the woman reportedly said, 'I am going to my children.' When informed that the Carswell children were dead, the woman smiled and replied, 'Not those children, my children. They are waiting for me.' Witness further claims the woman showed no signs of remorse or distress when the Carswell tragedy was mentioned. Instead, she reportedly said, 'Some chains can only be broken by the most terrible sacrifice. I have made mine. They have made theirs. Now we are all free.' Witness reports that upon attempting to apprehend the woman, she produced a small vial from her clothing and threatened to consume its contents if approached. Witness, being alone and unarmed, chose not to pursue further and instead continued to his destination to report the encounter. At the bottom of the transcription, Sheriff Williams had written a single note: "Account deemed unreliable. Witness J known for fabrication and excessive consumption of spirits." The interview was apparently never included in the official investigation records. Whether this encounter actually occurred or was indeed a fabrication cannot be determined. However, it represents the only known account of anyone allegedly interacting with Eliza Brown after the events at the Carswell plantation. If authentic, it suggests she was not only alive and free a month after her disappearance, but moving with confidence and clarity of purpose. In 2020, genetic testing of soil samples from the former Pigpen site revealed an unexpected finding. Mingled with the pig DNA were traces of human DNA, confirming that human remains had indeed decomposed in that location. More surprisingly, the analysis identified DNA consistent with African ancestry alongside European markers typical of the region's white population. This finding raises disturbing possibilities about what or who was actually buried in the pigpen. Had Eliza disposed of evidence there beyond the children's remains? Or had the site been used for clandestine burials before the events of October 1853? County death records from the decade prior to the Carswell tragedy show at least 7 enslaved persons from the plantation listed as deceased, cause unreported. No burial locations are recorded for these individuals. It was common practice on many plantations to bury enslaved persons in unmarked graves on the property, often in areas considered unsuitable for other purposes. Had the pigpen been established over such a burial ground? Or had Eliza chosen the location specifically because it already held significance as a site of hidden suffering? The genetic evidence cannot answer these questions definitively, but it confirms that the site held more complex horrors than even the official investigation had uncovered, layers of tragedy compressed into the same soil. In 2022, a descendant of Margaret Carswell donated a collection of family papers to the Georgia Historical Society. Among these was a previously unknown letter from Margaret to her sister in Charleston, dated December 1853, 2 months after the children's deaths. "I cannot remain in this house any longer. Every corner holds memories that have become unbearable. Thaddeus speaks of replacing the children as though they were livestock lost to disease. He has already made inquiries about suitable matches. Though my own grief remains raw, I find myself thinking constantly of Eliza, not with hatred as Thaddeus does, but with a terrible understanding that grows clearer each day. I witnessed what was happening in this house, to those children, to her, to all of them. I witnessed and I did nothing. Sarah came to me once, not long before it happened. She said, "Mama, Eliza tells me stories about children who escape to a place where no one can hurt them anymore." I thought it a harmless fancy, a comfort for a sensitive child. Now I understand it was a warning I failed to heed. The truth, dearest sister, is that I do not know if I can condemn Eliza entirely, even knowing what she did. To do so would require me to believe that what preceded her actions was somehow less monstrous, and I can no longer maintain that illusion. Pray for me, as I can no longer pray for myself. I fear my soul is as lost as those of my children. This letter, never sent and apparently hidden away for generations, offers a rare glimpse into Margaret Carswell's state of mind following the tragedy. It suggests a woman beginning to question the moral foundations of the system she had participated in, recognizing her own complicity even as she grieved her profound loss. In this sense, Margaret too was transformed by Eliza's actions, forced into a confrontation with truths she had previously managed to avoid. Whether this awakening led to any meaningful change in her beliefs or behaviors remains unknown. The historical record shows only that she left the plantation within months of writing the letter, never to return. Local folklore in Chatham County includes a curious tradition that began sometime in the early 1900s and continues to this day. On October 15th each year, some families place their kitchen knives in drawers rather than leaving them on counters or in blocks, regardless of whether they know the history behind this practice. When folklorist Daniel Murphy interviewed county residents about this custom in 2024, he found that most could not explain its origins. "It's just what my mama did," was a common response. "Bad luck to leave knives out on that day." A few older residents, however, connected the tradition to that woman who worked in the big house kitchen, though details of the actual history had become distorted over generations. The practice appears to have originated among black families in the area before gradually spreading to the wider community, its specific meaning fading even as the ritual persisted. This transformation of historical trauma into folkloric practice represents a kind of cultural memory that outlasts conscious recollection. Long after the details have been forgotten, something remains. A behavioral echo of past horrors, preserved in mundane daily actions. What are we to make of Eliza Brown and the terrible events at the Carswell plantation? History offers no simple moral to extract, no neat resolution to satisfy our desire for justice or closure. We know that 3 children died. We know that a woman who had herself been grievously wronged likely caused those deaths. We know that the system that created the conditions for this tragedy continued for years afterward, claiming countless more victims. Perhaps the most honest conclusion is simply this: in a profoundly dehumanizing system, Eliza Brown made a choice to assert her agency in the only way available to her. That this choice involved an act of horrific violence reflects not on her individual morality, but on the utter absence of moral alternatives within the system that contained her. The true horror of the Carswell plantation tragedy lies not in the actions of a single desperate woman, but in the reality that such desperation was deliberately and systematically manufactured across an entire society. The monstrosity was not in Eliza Brown, but in the institution that created the conditions where feeding children to pigs could be conceived as an act of liberation. In the end, we are left not with answers, but with questions that echo across time. What does freedom mean when all paths to it are soaked in blood? What responsibility do we bear for systems of oppression we inherit rather than create? And how do we reckon with historical horrors too painful to confront, yet too significant to forget? The stretch of highway that now covers the former Carswell plantation carries thousands of travelers each day, most unaware of the ground they pass over. But sometimes, late at night when traffic thins and the modern world grows quiet, something remains that cannot be paved over or forgotten. Some say it's just radio interference, a quirk of topography or nearby power lines. Others insist it's something more, the land itself remembering what happened there, a story too terrible to fade completely from the world. Either way, if you find yourself driving that road after dark, you might notice your radio catching strange signals. Through the static, some travelers report hearing what sounds like a woman's voice, low and determined, reciting what might be names, too indistinct to make out clearly, but delivered with the cadence of a roll call or a prayer. And beneath that voice, almost too faint to perceive, something else, the sound of children, not crying or in distress, but laughing, free. The Carswell plantation is gone. Its buildings have crumbled, its boundaries have been erased by time and development. The people who lived and died there, enslaved and enslavers alike, have long since returned to the earth. But the story remains, carried forward by fragments of evidence, by oral histories, by the persistent efforts of those who believe that even the most disturbing truths must be preserved if we are to understand our present. And perhaps, in some impossible-to-define way, Eliza Brown remains as well, not as a ghost or supernatural presence, but as a question that has never been fully answered, a reckoning that has never been completed. In the official histories, she is a murderer, a monster who committed an unthinkable crime against innocent children. In counter-narratives preserved through generations of oral tradition, she is something more complex, a woman who refused to accept that her own children could be taken while she was forced to nurture the children of their taker. The truth, as always, lies somewhere in the painful space between these versions, in the recognition that systems of extreme oppression produce extreme responses, that humanity denied will eventually assert itself, sometimes in terrible ways. If you should visit Chatham County today and ask about Eliza Brown, few would recognize the name. But ask about the woman who fed her master's children to the pigs, and you might see a flicker of recognition, a nervous glance, perhaps even a gesture to ward off bad luck. For some stories never fully die, even when we try to bury them beneath highways and progress and the comfortable illusion that the past is truly past. They remain in the soil. They feed something that continues to grow. They wait for us to listen.